Okay, boys and girls, so now we have just finished topic 10. I know we only spent 2 days on it, but that kind of wrapped up multiplying fractions. And now we're going into topic 12. So we're going to start here on 12.1, where we are going to introduce fractions and decimals. We already know about fractions, but now we're going to focus on how you can relate fractions and decimals. So right now, if you do not have it out, you need volume 2 of your math book, and we are on page 445. So you're going to follow along on pages 445 to 447. If you don't have that right now, go ahead and pause the video and get your math book. All right, so let's take a look at this first example. It says here, according to a survey, 7 out of 10 pet owners have a dog. Represent this in a drawing. Well, 7 out of 10, that kind of reminds me of that fraction, right? 7 tenths or 7 out of 10. And if I were going to represent that in a drawing, what I would do, I kind of think of like our base 10 blocks, right? And I know that there's a flat, right? And that is equal to 100. Or I have single units, or I have tens. So when I think of tenths, what I'm thinking of here are kind of those like tens, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And so if I need 7 out of 10 of those, I am then going to shade 7 of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So now I've represented this in a drawing as 7 out of 10. And I've related it to the fraction 7 tenths. So now let's look down here at this question. Now they want to know how many pet owners do not have a dog. Well, when I look back at the model that I've drawn, I can see that 7 out of 10 do. So when I look, I know my whole figure was divided into 10 equal parts. So that would leave me with 1, 2, and 3 tenths, or 3 out of 10 that do not. So I might say something like 3 tenths, or I could say 3 out of 10. So you're probably wondering how that relates to decimals. So let's turn the page so that we can take our understanding of fractions and representing them to now writing them as a decimal. Let's take a look here at the top of the page. I'm focused in on this green bubble right here, and I'm going to read this and I want you guys to follow along. A decimal is another representation for a fraction and also names parts of wholes. A decimal is a number with 1 or more digits to the right of the decimal point. So I know you guys have seen decimal points before. You've probably seen them. If you have an older sibling, they probably worked with decimals. We've also encountered them a couple times during our work in athletics. So let's take a look here at these 3 representations. So when we think of one whole, we're thinking of like that base 10 block that represents 100, right? We call it sometimes a flat. And then if we're thinking of 1/10, kind of like we did on the previous page when we represented 7 tenths, we're thinking of that as like one of those rods or 1/10. Then if we're thinking of 100th, right, we think of that flat again, which we know would be broken apart into 100 little single units, and we're talking about just one square. So we know the fraction 1/10, right? And we know the fraction 100th. But now let's look at them written as decimals. So we can see here the decimal 1/10 recorded as a 0, the decimal point, and a 1. And then we can see 100th written as a decimal with a 0, a decimal point, a 0, and a 1. So now if we look, guys, let's look at these little place value houses down here. We know that when you have your decimal point, right, we have the ones place, and then right after that, we would have the tens place, then the hundreds place, right? The thousands, the 10,000s. Well, with decimals, we're talking about these place values, right, to the right of the decimal point. So when we're going this way, instead of how we would normally look, normally we're not even used to this decimal point, and we just start here at ones and go this way. But now we're talking about these place values. Again, they represent an amount less than one whole. So the first one I see here, this place value, is the tenths place. The tenths place comes first, and then if we look at the next one we see after the tenths comes the hundredths. So some people, you have to be able to memorize this. I think of it as like just TH, because I know a lot of words have that TH ending, right? Tenths, hundredths. And now let's look at a couple examples. So now I think we're ready to practice. So the question was, on Kelsey Street, 6 out of 10 houses have swing sets. Write 6/10 as a decimal. So we can look right here and we can see that they've gone ahead and they've represented 6/10 here using a model, just like we did on the front, right? 6 out of 10. If you were to count, there's 10 equal parts and 6 are shaded. So if we're going to write that as a decimal, knowing that the tenths place is the first place value, we would need 0 wholes because there's not any whole figures shaded, our decimal point, and then the number 6. But now let's take a look at the figure right next door. If you look at the shaded part, you can see that this part that's shaded right there in green actually represents the same amount in this second representation. So what I tell students is to think of money, right? If this whole figure were $1, right now you have 60 cents, right? Or you have 6 dimes in your pocket. But now look at this drawing. We still have one whole dollar, but we've broken it apart like into pennies. So there's 100 because I know 100 pennies make up $1. And if I were to count each of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I count by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. There is still the same amount of change in my pocket. So 6/10 is actually the same or equivalent as 60 hundredths. So 6/10 is written with a decimal point and the number 6, and 60 hundredths. Can you guys see how we just basically added on a 0? Remember what we do to the top, we must do to the bottom. So they are equivalent, and that would be equivalent or equal to 0 and 60 hundredths. Let's take a look at this example. A few more, and then you guys will be able to practice on your own. In the Kelsey Street neighborhood, 75 out of 100 houses are 2-story homes. So right away, I know that they're breaking the whole figure or the whole neighborhood into 100 equal parts, right? 100 houses. And they're saying that 75 out of those 100 are 2-story homes, kind of like 75 hundredths. Now they want you to write that as a decimal. They also want you to shade the grid to show the equivalent fraction and decimal. Well, I know that, right, point TH, right, is what I said I would remember it as. Like, yeah, I just did that sound. So 75 hundredths. So 75 has to end in the hundredth spot. So that would look like this. Because I'm going to read my decimal point to the place value where it ends. So I have 75, and then where did my decimal end? In the hundredths place, 75 hundredths. So now if I were to come over here and shade this, I would have to shade 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 75 hundredths. Let's take a look at a couple more. So here we're relating this to money. Just like I told you, I often tell students to relate this to money. For example, they're showing you that one whole figure right here is kind of the same as $1, and $1 would be the same as 100 100ths, right? Because all 100 little parts are shaded. And then right here, a dime is equivalent to 1/10. See that here? 1/10. Why? Because there's only 1 out of 10 parts. Now, you're probably wondering, but I see 10 shaded. Yes, you see 10 out of 100, but you guys, because you know so much about fractions, you know that's the same as crossing off both of these zeros and leaving you with that equivalent fraction of 1/10. Now, if you look at just 1 penny by itself, that's just like having just that one little square shaded, right? Or 1/100th. Take a look at how it's written as a decimal. Just a 1 in the hundredths place. So now let's look at this example. If we have $2.35, that's like having 100 100ths here, 100 100ths here, right? So it's like 100 plus 100 plus, now what do we have here? Well, it looks like 10, 20, 30, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 35. So really, I see right here 235 hundredths, just like they've represented here. Or you could write it as 1, 2 whole figures, and then 35 hundredths, just as you see it recorded here. So now you guys have a few that you're going to try on your own, problems 3 through 12. You have to write a decimal and a fraction for each diagram. So if you're going to look at this one, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 parts, so 4 hundredths shaded, and I want to think of that almost as money, and that would be 0 wholes. There are no tenths, just 4 hundredths. Almost like having 4 pennies in your pocket. You guys are going to try these out. You're doing problems 3 through 12, and we'll meet at 2 o'clock. You also have 2 exit ticket questions.